Every waiter in the restaurant was too afraid to serve the mafia boss in the corner booth, so they pushed the shy new waitress toward him instead. Trembling, she dropped her tray, and an old silver watch slipped from her apron and rolled to his feet. What she didn't know, that watch was the one thing the most feared man in the city had been searching years to find, and the father she'd lost was the reason he'd never stopped looking. The first thing Lily noticed when she walked into Lombard's that Tuesday evening was the silence. Not the kind of quiet you get on a slow night. This was different. The cooks had stopped talking. The bartender was polishing the same glass over and over without looking at it. Two of the senior waiters stood near the kitchen door, whispering, their faces pale. Lily followed their eyes to the corner booth. A man sat alone there, dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than her rent for a year. He wasn't loud. He wasn't doing anything threatening. He was just sitting, reading the menu under the low golden light, one hand resting flat on the white tablecloth. But the whole restaurant seemed to bend away from him, like he was the center of something heavy. "That's his table," her manager Donato said, appearing beside her. His voice cracked. "Corner booth, you take it." "Me?" Lily's stomach dropped. She'd only worked here 11 days. "Donato, Everyone else has served him before. They won't go back." He pressed a fresh notepad into her shaking hands. "His name is Mr. Moretti. You smile, you take his order, you say nothing else. Understand? Nothing." She wanted to ask why everyone looked like they were attending a funeral, but Donato had already walked away, fast, like he couldn't get far enough. Lily took a breath. She smoothed down her apron, tucked a loose curl behind her ear, and reminded herself that she needed this job more than she'd ever needed anything. The debt collectors had called again that morning. She couldn't afford to lose this. She picked up a tray with a pitcher of ice water and 2 glasses and crossed the floor. Mr. Moretti looked up as she approached. He had sharp gray eyes, the kind that seemed to read everything about you in a single glance. Your fear, your name, the lie you were about to tell. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe in his early 40s, with dark hair going silver at the edges. "Good evening, sir," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "Can I start you off with—" That was when her hands betrayed her. The tray tilted. She grabbed for it, but the pitcher slid, and the whole thing came down with a crash that cut through the silent room like a gunshot. Water and ice and broken glass scattered across the polished floor. A few drops splashed the cuff of his expensive trousers. The restaurant went so still that Lily could hear her own heartbeat.
"I'm so sorry,"
she gasped, dropping to her knees.
"I'm so sorry. I'll clean it, please."
She grabbed napkins, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold them. Tears burned behind her eyes. This was it. She was going to be fired, or worse, judging by how everyone had been acting. And then, as she leaned forward to wipe the floor, something slipped out of the front pocket of her apron. It hit the ground with a soft metallic clink and rolled, spinning, until it stopped near the man's polished shoe. A pocket watch. Old, silver, scratched from years of being carried. The only thing her father had left her that the loan sharks hadn't taken. She reached for it.
"That's mine. I'm sorry."
But his hand got there first. Mr. Moretti bent down and picked it up, and something changed in him. The cold stillness in his face cracked. He turned the watch over slowly in his fingers, his thumb running across the back of it, where a small design had been engraved long ago. A hawk with its wings spread wide over 2 crossed keys. When he looked up at her, his gray eyes weren't sharp anymore. They were wide, almost stunned. "Where," he said quietly, "did you get this?" Lily froze, still on her knees among the broken glass.
"It was my father's," she whispered. "He passed away. It's all I have left of him. Please, I didn't steal it."
"Your father?" Mr. Moretti's voice was strange now, thick, like he was forcing the words out. What was his name? She didn't understand why a feared stranger cared about a cheap old watch, but there was something in his face, not anger, but something raw and unguarded, that made her answer honestly.
Arthur, she said. His name was Arthur.
The watch went still in his hand. For a long moment, he didn't move at all. The whole restaurant watched, holding its breath, certain they were about to witness something terrible. Instead, the most dangerous man in Chicago slowly closed his fingers around the silver watch, pressed it to his chest, and shut his eyes like a man who had just heard a voice from his own grave. "Get up off the floor," he said softly. Not a command, almost a plea. "Please, don't ever kneel in front of me again." And Lily, more confused and frightened than she had ever been in her life, realized this night was not going to end the way anyone expected. The back office of Lombard's was small and warm, lined with shelves of wine bottles and old ledgers. Donato had practically tripped over himself unlocking it when Mr. Moretti asked for a private room. Now the door was shut, and Lily sat in a worn leather chair across from a man the entire city seemed afraid of. He hadn't given the watch back yet. He held it in both hands, staring at the engraving like it might disappear if he blinked. "Tell me about him," he said. "Your father. Everything." Lily twisted her fingers in her lap. "I don't understand what's happening. Did he owe you something too?" Something flickered across his face. No, the opposite. He set the watch on the desk between them, gently, like it was made of glass. "Talk to me. I won't hurt you. You have my word, and I don't give it often." There was a steadiness in his voice that made her believe him, even though every instinct told her to run. So she talked. She told him that her father had been a driver, not a taxi driver, the kind who got hired for odd jobs, moving people and things around the city late at night. She'd been young and never asked questions. He was gentle and quiet and good at fixing engines. He used to let her sit on his lap and hold the steering wheel in empty parking lots. "He died when I was 16, she said. Her voice wavered. "There was an accident. A car went off the road by the river one night. They told me he was trying to help a friend who was in trouble. He pushed the other man out of the car before it went into the water." She wiped her eyes quickly. "He didn't make it out himself." Across the desk, Mr. Moretti had gone very pale. "The friend," he said. "Did you ever learn his name?" "No, nobody ever told me." She shook her head. "After that, it was just me. And the debts. My father borrowed money from a man named Marcus to pay for my mother's hospital bills before she passed. The interest kept growing. Marcus says I still owe almost $40,000. A bitter laugh escaped her. "I'll be paying it until I'm an old woman." For a long time, the man across from her said nothing. He stood and walked to the small window, looking out at the alley behind the restaurant. When he finally spoke, his back was still turned. "The man your father pushed out of that car," he said, "was my younger brother, Thomas." Lily's breath caught. There was a job that went wrong. Thomas was trapped. The driver, your father, could have run, saved himself. Instead, he stayed, got Thomas clear, and went into the river with the car. He turned around, and his gray eyes were wet. I spent years trying to find that man's family, to thank them, to repay what couldn't be repaid. The trail went cold. I thought I'd failed him forever. He picked up the watch again and held it out to her. "I gave this to Thomas on his 18th birthday. The hawk and the keys. It's our family crest. Thomas must have given it to your father that night, in the seconds before the end. As thanks. The only thing he had on him worth giving." Lily stared at the watch in his open palm. The thing she'd carried in her pocket for years, the last piece of her dad, had a whole history she'd never known. "I always wondered why he had it," she whispered. "He never explained. He just said it was important and I should keep it safe." "He kept it because of what it cost." Mr. Moretti pressed it back into her hands and closed her fingers around it. It's yours. It will always be yours. Lily looked down at the silver disc, then back up at him. Then why did everyone out there look so afraid of you? A tired smile crossed his face. Because of who I became after Thomas died. I'm not a good man, Lily. People in this city have reasons to fear me, but I have never and will never forget a debt of honor. He sat back down, and now he looked less like a monster and more like a man carrying too much weight. Your father saved the only family I had left, and his daughter is waiting tables and being chased by a loan shark over $40,000. The way he said the name Marcus changed. It went cold. Marcus Reed, he said slowly. Heavyset man, runs his money out of a pawn shop on Halstead Street. Lily blinked. You know him? I know of him. He's been trying to climb into things that don't belong to him for a while now. His jaw tightened. And he has men watching you. Don't look so surprised. A man like that doesn't let $40,000 walk around the city without keeping an eye on it. A chill ran down Lily's spine. She thought of the gray car she'd seen parked outside her building 3 mornings in a row. She'd told herself it was nothing. Are you saying I'm in danger? She asked. He met her eyes. I'm saying that for the first time in your life, you're not facing it alone. He stood and buttoned his jacket, the dangerous calm returning to him like a coat he put back on. Go home tonight. Lock your door. I'll come to you in the morning, and we're going to fix every broken thing your father left behind. He walked to the door, then paused. He was a hero, your father, he said without turning. Whatever else you've been told, hold on to that. Then he was gone, and Lily sat alone with the watch warm in her hands, her whole world quietly tilting on its side. Lily barely slept. She lay awake most of the night with the watch on her chest, going over everything he'd said. By the time gray morning light crept through her thin curtains, she'd half convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing. A mafia boss who knew her dead father? Men watching her building? It sounded like something out of a movie, not her small, tired life. Then she pulled back the curtain to look at the street, and her stomach turned to ice. The gray car was there again. But this time, it wasn't alone. A second car sat behind it, and 2 men leaned against it, drinking coffee, watching her front door like they had all the time in the world. One of them looked up at her window. He smiled and lifted his cup in a little mocking toast. Lily let the curtain drop and backed away, her heart slamming. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She answered without thinking. Good morning, sweetheart. The voice was oily and pleased with itself. This is Marcus. I think it's time you and I had a proper conversation about your father's account. Don't go anywhere. My boys will bring you to me. The line went dead. Lily stood frozen in the middle of her tiny apartment. There was nowhere to run. The fire escape led to the same alley. They had the front covered. Her hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the phone. Then, outside, she heard car doors, voices, raised, sharp, suddenly afraid. She rushed back to the window. 3 black SUVs had pulled up along the curb, boxing Marcus's men in. Doors opened. Large men in dark suits stepped out without hurry, and there was something about the way they moved, calm, certain, that made Marcus's 2 thugs scramble back into their car. Within seconds, both gray vehicles peeled away down the street, tires squealing. And out of the middle SUV stepped Mr. Moretti, adjusting his cuffs like he'd merely stopped by for breakfast. Lily was downstairs and out the front door before she'd decided to move. They were here, she blurted. Marcus called me. He said, I know. He looked her over, checking that she was unharmed, then nodded toward her building. Pack a bag, just the things that matter. We don't have a lot of time before he tries again with more men. Pack a bag for what? Lily wrapped her arms around herself. I can't just leave. This is my home. I have a job. You have a job that pays you next to nothing, and a home with no lock strong enough to keep that man out. His voice softened. Lily, listen to me carefully. I'm not asking you to disappear into my world. I'm offering you something real. He explained it plainly, standing right there on the cracked sidewalk while his men watched the street. He owned an estate outside the city, a large household with staff, gardens, guests who came and went. The woman who ran the hospitality there, managing the rooms, the events, the staff schedules, had recently retired. It was a real position, with real responsibilities and a real salary. More money in a month than Lily made in half a year. You'd be an employee, he said. Nothing more, unless you wanted to be nothing more. You'd have your own quarters, your own life, but you'd be behind walls Marcus can't get through, with people around you who won't let anything happen. Lily stared at him. Why would you give me a job like that? I dropped a tray on you yesterday. I have no experience running anything. You ran this whole life by yourself since you were 16, drowning in someone else's debt, and you're still standing. He almost smiled. I think you can manage a household. She wanted to say no. Everything sensible in her wanted to say no, to refuse charity, to keep her independence, to not tie herself to a dangerous stranger no matter how kind his eyes had turned. But then she thought of Marcus's voice on the phone. My boys will bring you to me. She thought of the man toasting her with his coffee cup like she was already his. If I come, she said carefully, I'm working. I'm earning it. This isn't a handout. Agreed. And the moment I want to leave, I leave. No questions. You have my word. He held out his hand. And, as I told you, I don't give it often. Lily looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she thought of the watch in her pocket, of her father pushing a stranger out of a sinking car, of the kind of man who would do that for someone he barely knew. Maybe courage ran in the family. Maybe it was her turn to take a leap into the dark and trust it would hold. She shook his hand. I'll pack, she said. 20 minutes later, she came back down with a single suitcase and the watch around her neck on an old chain. Her whole life fit into one bag. It was a strange, hollow feeling, and underneath it, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe, or the first thin edge of it. As one of the men loaded her suitcase into the SUV, Mr. Moretti opened the door for her himself. One thing, he said as she climbed in. The people at the estate don't know about your father, or about Thomas. As far as anyone is concerned, you're a professional I hired because you're good at the job. It keeps you safer if Marcus thinks you're just another worker, not someone I'd protect. So I'm a secret, Lily said. You're an investment, he corrected gently, and I protect my investments. The car pulled away from the only neighborhood she'd ever known, and Lily didn't look back. The estate didn't look real. Lily had expected something cold and fortress-like, all stone walls and armed men. Instead, the SUV turned through tall iron gates onto a long drive lined with old trees and a house spread out before her like something from a painting. Pale stone, climbing ivy, wide windows catching the afternoon sun. Beyond it, the land sloped down to the edge of Lake Forest, where the water lay flat and silver under the sky. This is where I work? She said, almost to herself. This is where you live, Mr. Moretti said. There's a difference. Try to remember it. The first few days passed in a blur. There was so much to learn that Lily had no time to feel afraid. The household staff numbered nearly a dozen. Cooks, gardeners, housekeepers, 2 drivers, and they'd been without a coordinator for weeks. Schedules had fallen apart. Supplies were running low. The previous woman had kept everything in her head, and now that head was retired in Florida. To Lily's surprise, the work suited her. She'd spent years juggling bills, double shifts, and impossible demands on no money at all, organizing a kitchen order or smoothing over a scheduling fight between two housekeepers felt almost easy by comparison. Within a week, the staff stopped looking at her like an intruder and started bringing her their problems. The head cook, a sharp older woman named Rosa, declared her the first sensible person they'd hired in years. Mr. Moretti kept his distance and kept his word. He was strict about manners and order, but he never once made her feel small. When they passed in the halls, he gave her a respectful nod. When she brought him the weekly accounts, he reviewed them seriously, treating her like someone whose work mattered. He never mentioned the watch, never brought up her father, never asked anything of her that an ordinary employer wouldn't. If anything, he seemed to go out of his way to make sure she had no reason to be uneasy. But Lily was curious by nature, and curiosity has a way of pulling at loose threads. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. She was organizing his study, a room she'd been told to keep tidy but never to disturb, sorting old books and clearing dust from the high shelves. While moving a stack of leather folders, one slipped from her hands and spilled across the desk. Photographs scattered out. Old ones, with the soft, faded color of pictures from years ago. Lily knelt to gather them, and then she stopped, because she recognized a face. Her father. There he was, younger than she'd ever seen him, leaning against the hood of a car with a wrench in one hand and a wide grin on his face. And beside him stood two other young men, arms slung over each other's shoulders. One of them she didn't know. Slim, laughing, with kind eyes. The other was unmistakable, even decades younger. The same sharp gray eyes, the same set jaw. Mr. Moretti. Her hands trembled as she turned the photo over. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written 3 names. Arthur, Tommy, Vince. She sat down hard on the floor of the study, the photo in her lap. It was one thing to be told a story in a back office, to hear that her father had once known these men. It was another thing entirely to see it. Her dad, young and happy, his arm around the boy who would grow into the man who now signed her paychecks. These weren't strangers who happened to share a tragedy. They had been friends, real ones. Her father had a whole life she'd never known, full of people who'd loved him. And the man who ran this estate hadn't hired her out of pity. She understood that now in a way she hadn't before. He'd looked at her dropping a tray, at her drowning in debt, and he hadn't seen a clumsy waitress. He'd seen the daughter of his friend. He'd been trying, in the only way a man like him knew how, to keep a promise to a ghost. "You found them?" She startled. Mr. Moretti stood in the doorway, watching her. She hadn't heard him come in.
"I'm sorry," she said quickly, gathering the photos. "I knocked the folder over. I wasn't snooping." "It's all right." He crossed the room and crouched beside her, taking the picture from her hands. A faint smile touched his face as he looked at it. "That was the summer before everything went wrong. Your father had just fixed up that car from nothing. He was so proud of it." He tapped the laughing young man in the middle. "That's Thomas, my brother." "They look so happy," Lily whispered. "They were." He was quiet a moment. "Your father wasn't part of our business, you understand. He just fixed cars and drove when we needed it, and somewhere along the way he became one of us. A good man in a bad crowd. The best of us, probably." He set the photo gently back on the desk. "When I look at you, I see him. The way you carry yourself when you think no one's watching. He had that too." Lily felt her eyes sting. For years, her father had been a hole in her life, a man who'd vanished into a river, leaving nothing but debt and a watch. Now, slowly, he was becoming real again, through the eyes of someone who'd known him before she was even born. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me, for all of it." He stood and offered her his hand, helping her up off the floor. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I'm only paying back what I owe. Now, Rosa tells me you've reorganized her entire pantry and she's never been happier. Keep that up and the staff will follow you anywhere."
He left her alone in the study, and Lily looked once more at the photograph of 3 young men who'd had no idea what was coming. Then she carefully set it upright on the shelf where the afternoon light could reach it. The hotel ballroom glittered like the inside of a jewelry box. Lily had never seen anything like it. Crystal chandeliers threw light across hundreds of guests in evening gowns and tailored suits. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. A string quartet played somewhere near the back. The charity gala was the biggest event Mr. Moretti hosted all year, and he'd brought Lily along to manage the catering, the one part of the night he refused to leave to a hotel's staff. She was good at it. She moved between the kitchen and the floor, fixing problems before anyone noticed them. A slow table here, a missing tray there. For the first time in her life, she felt competent at something that mattered, useful in a room full of important people. She'd even bought a simple dark green dress for the occasion, and when Mr. Moretti had seen her in it earlier, he'd paused, just for a second, before giving her a small nod of approval. Everything was going perfectly. Then she saw the heavy-set man near the bar, and her blood ran cold. She didn't know his face, but she knew the look, the way he watched the room, like he was pricing everything in it. He held a glass he wasn't drinking from, and when he turned and his eyes landed on her, they sharpened, then crawled over her with slow, ugly recognition. It was Marcus. It had to be. She'd never seen him, but some animal part of her knew. Lily turned quickly toward the kitchen, pulse hammering. He's not supposed to be here. This is an invitation-only event. She told herself to stay calm, to keep working, that there were hundreds of people around and nothing could happen. But a few minutes later, slipping down the quiet service hallway with a clipboard in hand, she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy ones. "Well, well," came that oily voice she'd heard on the phone. "The famous disappearing waitress. You've been very hard to find, sweetheart." She spun around. Marcus filled the narrow hallway, blocking the way back to the ballroom. Up close, he was even larger, with a soft, smiling face that didn't match his eyes at all. "I have to get back to work," Lily said, keeping her voice as steady as she could. "Work, right," he chuckled. "Funny thing, one day you're slinging plates at Lombard's, drowning in your daddy's debt. Next day you vanish, and I hear you've landed yourself a cozy little spot at Vince Moretti's estate." He stepped closer. "Now how does a girl like you manage that?" "I'm an employee. He hired me to run the household." "Sure he did." Marcus's smile widened. "Here's what I think. I think you've made yourself important to a very important man. And that's good news for you, because it means I don't have to come collecting the hard way anymore." He lowered his voice. "All you have to do is be my little set of eyes inside those walls. Tell me where he keeps his books, his schedules, who comes and goes. Do that, and your 40,000 disappears. Refuse, and you'll do what, exactly?" The voice came from the end of the hallway, calm and quiet, and it cut Marcus off mid-sentence. "Mr." Moretti stood there, hands in his pockets, looking for all the world like a man who'd wandered out for some fresh air. But there was something underneath the calm that made the temperature in the hallway seem to drop 10 degrees. Marcus straightened, recovering fast. "Vince, lovely party. I was just getting acquainted with your new staff." "You weren't invited, Marcus." "I go where the money is." Marcus spread his hands. "And you've got a girl here who owes me a great deal of it. I came to discuss a payment plan, nothing more." Mr. Moretti walked toward them, unhurried, until he stood between Marcus and Lily. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a single threat she could have repeated later. He simply looked at the bigger man, and when he spoke, every word landed soft and exact. "She doesn't owe you anything anymore. You just don't know it yet." A faint smile. "You've been reaching for things that aren't yours for a while now, Marcus. Territory, accounts, people. I've watched you do it, and I've been patient, because patience is cheaper than the alternative. but you walked into my event tonight and you put your hand near someone under my roof." He tilted his head. "That was a mistake, the kind that ends careers." Marcus's smile flickered. For just a moment, the soft confidence slipped, and Lily saw fear underneath it. The look of a man who'd thought he was the biggest predator in the room and just realized he wasn't. "You're bluffing," Marcus said, but it came out thin. "You know me better than that." "Mr." Moretti glanced once toward the ballroom, where two of his men had quietly appeared at the mouth of the hallway. "Now you're going to walk out of here, smile at the door, thank the staff, and you're going to think very hard tonight about whether you really want to keep pulling on this thread." He leaned in slightly. "Because I promise you, you won't like what's tied to the other end." For a long, taut moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Marcus laughed, a forced, brittle sound, and stepped back. "Always a pleasure, Vince," he said. He shot Lily one last look, full of poison, then turned and walked toward the exit, flanked at a distance by the two silent men. Lily realized she'd been holding her breath the whole time. She let it out shakily. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, mister," Moretti said, watching the empty hallway where Marcus had vanished. "I did." He turned to her, and the cold left his face. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. He wanted me to spy on you." "I gathered." A muscle worked in his jaw. He didn't look angry at her. He looked angry at himself. "I should have kept you off the floor tonight. I underestimated how far he'd reach." He guided her gently back toward the light and noise of the ballroom. "It won't happen again. From now on, he's not a debt to manage. He's a problem to end." And something in the quiet certainty of those words told Lily that Marcus had just made the worst decision of his life. Saturday evening settled over the estate like a held breath. Mr. Moretti had been called away to the city on business, something to do with Marcus, though he hadn't said as much. He'd left after lunch with two of his men, telling Lily only that he'd be back late and that the house was well guarded. The rest of the staff had finished their day and retired to their quarters in the East Wing. By 9 o'clock, the main house was quiet and mostly dark, and Lily was alone in the small office near the study, finishing the next week's schedules. She liked the house at night. It was peaceful. The lake outside caught the last of the light and held it. She'd made herself a cup of tea and was halfway through the grocery orders when something made her look up. The lights had flickered, just for a second. Then they steadied. She frowned, told herself it was the old wiring, and went back to work. A minute later, the small green light on the security panel by the office door went dark. Lily had learned the house systems in her first week. Rosa had insisted, saying the coordinator needed to know how everything ran. She knew that green light meant the perimeter cameras were live. She knew it should never go out. Slowly, she set down her pen and crossed to the panel. Every camera feed read the same word in red: offline. Her heart began to pound. She moved to the window and looked out across the dark lawn. At first, she saw nothing. Then a shape detached itself from the shadow of the boathouse. A man, crouched low, moving toward the house. Behind him came a second, a third. They wore dark clothes and carried bags, and they moved with the quiet purpose of people who knew exactly what they'd come for. Lily's first instinct was pure terror. Her second, surprising her, was thought. The guards. There were supposed to be men watching the grounds. Either these intruders had gotten past them or drawn them to the far side of the property. Either way, she was on her own, and there were strangers about to enter the house. She thought about what they could want. Money, jewelry. But the way they moved, straight toward the study side of the house, told her they were after something specific. And she knew what was in that study. The folders, The accounts.
The ledgers that held every record of Mr. Moretti's business. Marcus. This was Marcus. Lily didn't let herself freeze. She slipped off her shoes so they wouldn't make noise, and she ran, not away, but toward the study. The study had a heavy old door with a deadbolt, installed for exactly this reason. But the ledgers weren't behind that door. They sat in the unlocked cabinet she dusted every week. If the thieves got in, they'd have everything in minutes. She reached the study, breathing hard. She could already hear a faint scraping at the rear French doors down the hall, the soft, patient sound of someone working a lock. Quick. She had to be quick. Lily pulled the ledgers from the cabinet, 3 heavy leather books, and looked around the dim room. The cabinet would be the first place they'd check. The desk drawers, the safe behind the painting, all obvious. She needed somewhere no one would think to look in a hurry. Her eyes landed on the long, built-in window seat beneath the bay windows. Rosa had once shown her that it lifted up, that the staff stored extra blankets inside it. Lily darted over, raised the cushioned lid, shoved the ledgers down beneath the folded linens, and lowered it shut. Then she grabbed a few decoy folders of harmless paperwork and left them sitting out on the desk, in plain sight. The French doors at the end of the hall clicked open. Lily's pulse roared in her ears. She slipped out of the study and pulled its heavy door closed behind her, throwing the deadbolt. Then she pressed herself into the dark alcove beneath the main staircase, the same way she used to hide as a child, and pulled out her phone. She didn't call the police. She called the number Mr. Moretti had made her memorize, the head of his security, a quiet man named Bruno, who stayed at the gatehouse.
"They cut the cameras," she whispered the moment he answered. 3 men inside the house, headed for the study. I locked the ledgers somewhere they won't find them. I'm hiding under the front stairs. Please, hurry. "Stay exactly where you are," Bruno said, instantly alert. "Don't move. Don't make a sound. We're coming." The next minutes were the longest of Lily's life. She heard the men reach the study door, heard them swear quietly when they found it bolted, heard the dull thud of a shoulder against wood. She pressed her hand over her own mouth to keep from making a sound, the silver watch clutched tight in her other fist like a talisman. The door began to splinter. And then, all at once, the night exploded with motion, not gunfire, but shouting, the heavy stamp of running feet, the sounds of struggle. Bruno's men poured in through the front and rear doors at the same time, fast and overwhelming. The 3 intruders never had a chance to reach what they came for. Within a minute, it was over. No shots fired. Just 3 men, face down on the marble floor, hands bound, breathing hard. Bruno found Lily under the stairs and crouched down to her level. "You can come out now," he said gently. "It's done. You're safe." She uncurled slowly, legs shaking. "The ledgers are in the window seat, under the blankets." Bruno stared at her for a moment, then let out a low, impressed breath. "You hid the books and bolted the door before we even got here." He helped her to her feet. "Mr. Moretti is going to want to hear about this. You may have just saved him more than you realize." Lily looked at the 3 bound men, at the splintered study door, at the quiet house she'd defended alone, and felt something new settle in her chest. Not fear, something closer to strength. Mr. Moretti came home a little after midnight. Lily was still awake, wrapped in a blanket in the kitchen with a cold cup of tea she hadn't touched, when she heard the cars on the gravel. He came through the door fast, and the moment his eyes found her sitting there, safe, unharmed, something in his shoulders dropped, like a weight he'd been carrying the whole drive home. He crossed the kitchen and crouched in front of her, scanning her face. "Bruno told me what happened. Are you hurt?" "No," she said. "I'm fine. A little shaken, that's all." "You hid the ledgers. You bolted the door. You called Bruno instead of panicking." He shook his head slowly, and there was wonder in it, mixed with something darker. "Most men I've trained for years wouldn't have kept their heads like that. You're remarkable. Do you know that?" Lily managed a small smile. "I think I was too scared to do anything stupid." No, that's not what scared looks like. He stood, and as he did, the warmth in his face cooled into something hard and final. Marcus sent those men. He cut my cameras and put thieves in my house, and the only reason they didn't get what they came for is because you were standing in their way. His voice was very quiet now. He put you in danger, inside my own walls. That's the end of it. What are you going to do? She asked. What I should have done weeks ago. He looked at her. Get some sleep, Lily. By tomorrow night, Marcus won't be a problem anymore. Not for you, not for anyone. She wanted to ask what that meant, but she'd seen enough now to understand that some questions were better left unasked, and that whatever he intended, it wasn't the kind of thing she could talk him out of. The meeting was set for Sunday morning at a shipping warehouse near the old transit tracks on the south side of the city. Neutral ground. Lily wasn't there. Mr. Moretti had been absolute about that, and for once, she hadn't argued. But she heard about it afterward, pieced together from Bruno and from the man himself, and what she heard surprised her. There was no shootout, no blood, nothing like the violence she'd braced herself for. Mr. Moretti walked into that warehouse with a single briefcase and 2 men, and he ended Marcus Reed without firing a shot. Marcus had come expecting a fight, or a negotiation, or maybe a chance to gloat. He'd brought his own muscle and his usual swagger. He'd leaned against a stack of crates with that soft, ugly smile and asked Vince what this was all about. And Mr. Moretti had simply opened the briefcase and started laying papers on the crate between them. The first was a record of every loan Marcus had ever issued, every account he ran out of that pawn shop on Halstead Street. The second was a stack of buyout agreements, because over the past weeks, quietly, through layers of companies no one could trace back to him, Mr. Moretti had purchased every debt Marcus owned. Marcus borrowed money too, it turned out, from bigger fish, from people who lent in the capital to play loan shark in the first place. And one by one, Mr. Moretti had bought all of it. You don't own those debts anymore, he told Marcus, sliding the papers across. I do. Every dollar you owe in this city is owed to me now, and I'm calling all of it, today. Marcus had laughed at first, then he'd read the papers. Then he'd stopped laughing. The numbers were ruinous, the kind of debt that couldn't be paid, couldn't be escaped, couldn't be negotiated. In a single morning, the man who'd terrorized Lily for years went from a rising predator to a man who owned nothing. Not his shop, not his accounts, not even the loyalty of the men standing beside him, who were already doing the math and quietly stepping back. You can't do this, Marcus had said, his voice cracking. You can't just... I already have. Mr. Moretti closed the briefcase. You wanted into my world, Marcus. You reached for territory that wasn't yours. You sent men into my home. And the one thing you never bothered to learn is that I don't fight the way you do. He'd looked at the bigger man with something almost like pity. I don't need a gun to take everything you have. I just needed time, and you gave me plenty. He'd let that sit. Then his voice had dropped into something colder than any threat. Here's the only mercy you'll get. You leave Chicago. Tonight. You don't come back, and you forget the name of every person you've ever tried to collect from, especially the young woman at my estate. He'd leaned in. If I ever hear that you've gone near her again, even once, the debts stop being a financial matter. Do you understand me? Everything you have left, including the freedom to walk out of this building, depends on the next words out of your mouth. For a long moment, Marcus had said nothing. His men had already drifted toward the exit, distancing themselves from a sinking ship. The fight had gone out of him entirely. He understood, finally, that he'd been beaten before he ever walked in the door. I understand, he'd said. Good. Mr. Moretti had picked up his briefcase and walked toward the daylight at the warehouse entrance. He'd paused only once, without turning around. "Arthur's daughter is off your books, and off everyone's, forever. You should have looked into who you were collecting from before you started. Might have saved yourself." Then he was gone, leaving Marcus standing alone among the crates, a ruined man in an empty building. When Mr. Moretti told Lily about it that evening, the short version, the clean version, she sat quietly for a long time.
"You bankrupted him," she said. "You didn't hurt him. You just took everything until he had nothing to stand on."
"It's more permanent than the alternative," he said. "A man who's hurt wants revenge. A man who's been beaten this way just wants to disappear." He looked at her. "He's gone, Lily. For good. You don't have to look over your shoulder anymore." For the first time in years, Lily believed it. He asked her to meet him at the park on Monday afternoon. It was an odd request. In all the weeks she'd lived at the estate, Mr. Moretti had never once asked to see her away from the house. But the note left with her morning coffee was simple: a time, a place, a park overlooking Lake Michigan. And so Lily put on her coat and let one of the drivers bring her into the city. She found him on a bench near the water, no security in sight, watching sailboats drift across the lake. He looked different out here in the open daylight, without the walls of the estate around him. Younger, somehow. More like the laughing boy in the old photograph than the man the whole city feared. "You came," he said as she sat down beside him. "You asked me to." She studied him. "You don't usually go anywhere without your men." "Today I wanted it to just be us. No house, no staff, no business." He turned to her, and there was something almost nervous in him which she'd never seen before. "There are some things I need to give you, and some things I need to say." He reached into his coat and brought out a folded envelope, thick with papers, and placed it in her hands. Lily opened it carefully. The first document was a property deed. She had to read the address twice before her breath caught. It was her childhood home. The small house her father had borrowed against, the one she'd assumed was lost forever to the bank and the debts. "It's paid off," he said quietly. "Free and clear. It's in your name now. No one can ever take it from you." Beneath the deed was a certified bank draft. The number on it made her go still. It was more than enough to clear every remaining debt in her family's name: the medical bills, the loans, the interest that had hung over her since she was 16. All of it. Gone. With a single piece of paper.
"I can't accept this," Lily said, her voice unsteady. "This is too much. The job, the protection, that was already more than I could ever repay, but this—"
"Listen to me." He turned on the bench to face her fully. "I need you to understand something, and I need you to really hear it, because I've carried it for a long time." He drew a breath. "Your father didn't just save my brother that night. He saved my whole family. Thomas was all I had left. When that car went into the river, your father had every reason in the world to save himself. A wife who'd passed, a young daughter at home waiting for him." His voice roughened. "He had you, Lily. And he still chose to push Thomas to safety and go down with the car. He gave up his life, and your father, so that I could keep my brother a little longer." Lily's eyes filled. She'd known the shape of the story, but hearing it laid out plainly, with her own name in it, broke something open in her chest. "For years I lived with that debt," he went on. "It sat on me heavier than anything. I told myself if I ever found his family, I'd balance the ledger. I'd make it right. And then you walked into Lombard's and dropped a tray on me, and I saw his watch on the floor. And I knew." A faint, broken smile. "The chance I thought I'd lost forever was kneeling right in front of me." "So this is you paying him back," Lily said softly. "Through me." "It was," he nodded. "At first. The job, the protection, ending Marcus, all of it started as a debt I owed your father." He paused. "But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about him. It became about you. The way you run that whole house like you were born to it." The way you hid those ledgers and kept your head when grown men would have run. You're not a debt to me anymore, Lily. You haven't been for a while." She didn't know what to say, so she just looked at him, at the lake, at the papers in her hands that meant freedom.
"Which is why," he continued, and here his voice grew careful, deliberate. "I'm giving you these and telling you that you're free. The house is yours. The money is yours. Marcus is gone. You owe nothing to anyone, including me." He looked out at the water. "You came into my world because you had no choice. You were drowning, and I pulled you out. But this is no kind of life for someone like you. The walls, the guards, the always looking over your shoulder. You deserve to live in the daylight." Lily understood then what he was really doing. He was setting her loose, opening the cage door himself, even though she could see, plainly now, that it cost him to do it. "You're sending me away," she said. "I'm letting you go," he corrected gently. "There's a difference. Sending you away would be for me. Letting you go is for you." He met her eyes. "Go build the life you would have had if none of this had ever touched your family. Open that little bakery you mentioned to Rosa. Be happy somewhere quiet, where no one knows my name." A pause. "It's what your father would have wanted for you. And it's what I want for you too." Lily looked down at the deed, the draft, the watch resting against her chest. Everything she'd lost, given back. A clean start, handed to her by the last man on earth she'd ever expected mercy from. "Thank you," she whispered. It wasn't enough. No words were. "For all of it. For seeing him in me. For seeing me." He stood and offered his hand to help her up, the same way he had that first day on the floor of Lombard's. "Go live, Lily," he said. "That's all the thanks I need." She took his hand, and for the first time since she was 16 years old, the future ahead of her was completely, wonderfully her own. 2 weeks later, the little bakery on Maple Street smelled like heaven. It sat on a quiet corner in a suburb far from the city, between a flower shop and a bookstore, with a striped awning and big front windows that let the morning sun pour across the counter. Lily had found it almost by accident, a small, empty space the owner was desperate to rent, and the moment she'd stepped inside, she'd known. This was it. This was the dream she'd carried around for years without ever daring to believe in. She'd named it Arthur's, after her father. The first days had been chaos, the good kind. She'd painted the walls a warm cream, found second-hand tables that didn't match and somehow looked perfect together, and spent long nights getting her grandmother's bread recipe just right. Word spread fast. The neighborhood had been missing a real bakery, and Lily's cinnamon rolls, people agreed, were the best they'd ever had. She was different now, and everyone who met her could see it, though they didn't know why. The shy, frightened girl who'd flinched at her own shadow at Lombard's was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked customers in the eye, who laughed easily, who ran her own small kingdom of flour and sugar with quiet confidence. The deed to her father's house sat framed in her apartment. The debts that had haunted her since she was 16 were nothing but ash. For the first time in her life, she slept the whole night through. She thought about him sometimes, the man who'd given her all of it. She wondered if he was all right, behind those walls, in that world she'd never have to enter again. She'd written him a letter once, a real one, thanking him properly. She never knew if it reached him, but she liked to imagine it had. On a Friday evening, as the light turned golden and the last customers trickled out, Lily started closing up. She wiped down the counters, counted the till, flipped the chairs onto the tables. The little bell over the door had just gone quiet for the day when it chimed once more. A delivery driver stood in the doorway, half hidden behind an enormous arrangement of flowers, white roses and pale lilies, the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Delivery for the owner," he said. "You Lily?" "That's me." She wiped her hands on her apron, surprised. "I didn't order anything." "Came prepaid. There's a card." He set the arrangement carefully on the counter, tipped his cap, and was gone before she could ask anything else.
Lily stood looking at the flowers for a long moment. Then she found the small white card tucked among the blooms and turned it over. There was no name, no message, just a single image pressed into the thick paper like a seal, the shape of a silver pocket watch, a hawk with its wings spread wide over two crossed keys. Her breath caught. Her hand went to her chest, where the real watch still hung on its chain, warm against her skin. She didn't need a signature. She knew exactly who it was from and what it meant. "I'm still here. You're still safe. I haven't forgotten." She carried the flowers to the front window and set them where they'd catch the morning light, where everyone passing by could see them. Outside, across the street and a little way down, a black sedan sat parked at the curb. Lily noticed it through the glass, the way she'd once noticed the gray car outside her old apartment with terror in her throat. But this was different. There was no fear in her now. The car had been there a while, she realized. Maybe it had been there other evenings too, quiet and patient, keeping a careful distance.
Watching over her bakery the way a guardian watches over something precious, not to control it, not to cage it, but simply to make sure no harm ever found its way to her door again. For a moment, she thought about walking outside, crossing the street, knocking on the window and seeing if it was really him, or just one of his men, or whether he'd ever even know she'd come out. But she didn't, because she understood now what he'd given her, and why he kept his distance to give it. He'd had 100 chances to keep her close, to make her stay in his world out of gratitude or fear, or even something warmer. Instead, he'd handed her freedom and stepped back into the shadows, asking nothing in return. He was protecting her from afar, precisely because he loved her enough not to pull her into the dark with him. That was the whole gift, pulling her out of one shadow without trapping her in another. So Lily lifted her hand slowly and pressed it flat against the glass of her bakery window. A small thing, a thank you and a goodbye, and an "I know you're there" all at once. Across the street, the headlights of the black sedan flickered, once, twice. An answer. "I see you. I'm glad. Be well." Then the engine started and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. Lily watched it go all the way down Maple Street until it turned the corner and disappeared into the soft orange glow of the setting sun. She stood there a while longer in the quiet, the smell of bread and cinnamon around her, the watch warm at her throat and the flowers glowing in the window. Her father had given his life for a stranger, and that act of courage, all these years later, had circled all the way back around to give his daughter everything she'd ever lost. Lily turned off the last of the lights, locked the door of the little bakery that bore her father's name, and walked home through the warm evening. Free, safe, and finally, completely home.